blood covered the trauma bay floor, slick and terrifyingly bright beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of Bay 4. 4 grown men, 2 security guards and 2 hospital orderlies could not hold him down. He was a phantom wrapped in bloody gauze and embedded shrapnel, roaring with a guttural intensity that visibly rattled the glass of the sliding doors. Every time a sterile needle approached his scarred, dirt-caked skin, he lashed out with terrifying, calculated precision, snapping a reinforced leather restraint as if it were cheap cotton. He was actively bleeding out, his life slipping away by the minute. Yet he flatly and violently refused to be saved, until she leaned in, risking everything, and whispered 5 impossible words. Midnight shifts at Mercy General's Level 1 Trauma Center usually danced on a razor's edge between controlled chaos and total systemic collapse. Tonight, the balance had completely shattered. The air in the emergency department was thick with the metallic tang of fresh blood, spilled iodine, and the sharp, anxious sweat of a medical staff pushed past their absolute limits. Josephine O'Connor stood by the nurse's station, her eyes fixed on the unfolding disaster inside Bay 4. She had been an ER nurse for 8 years, surviving through mass casualty incidents, gang-related crossfires, and devastating highway pileups. She knew the face of panic. She knew the frantic, wild thrashing of a patient drowning in their own hypoxia. But the man strapped to the gurney in the center of the room was different. He wasn't panicking. He was fighting a war. "Push another 2 milligrams of lorazepam," shouted Dr. Nolan Bridges, his voice cracking as he pinned his entire body weight against the patient's right shoulder. Nolan's scrubs were already soaked with the patient's blood, his face pale and slick with exertion. "I don't care if his pressure is dropping, just get him under. If we don't pack that subclavian bleed right now, he's going to code on this table." "He's fighting the restraints, doctor. If I push the line now, the needle is going to snap in his vein," shouted Travis, the senior orderly, his forearms bulging as he tried to secure the man's left leg. The patient, registered only as a John Doe brought in by an anonymous civilian drop-off, was a terrifying specimen of human endurance. He looked to be in his late 30s, his torso a map of intersecting scars that told a brutal, silent history of violent encounters. A jagged, deep laceration ran across his upper left chest, narrowly missing the artery but bleeding heavily enough to pool on the linoleum floor. He had 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and signs of blunt force trauma to his temple. Yet, his eyes were fully open. They were a piercing, cold grey, darting around the room, tracking every single movement, every hand, every instrument. He wasn't lashing out blindly. When Travis reached for the IV port, the man shifted his hips, utilizing leverage rather than brute strength, and kicked his leg in a short, brutal arc that sent the orderly stumbling backward into a tray of surgical instruments. The crash of stainless steel echoing through the bay sounded like a bomb going off. "Do not touch me," the man rasped. His voice was incredibly low, a gravelly whisper that somehow cut through the chaotic shouting of the room. It was devoid of hysteria. It was a simple, absolute statement of fact. "Put the needle down, or I will break your orbital bone." "Listen to me," Dr. Bridges pleaded, clearly out of his depth. "You are dying. Your blood volume is critical. You have to let us help you." "No sedatives," the man repeated, his jaw clenched as a fresh wave of agony clearly washed over him, though he barely winced. "No sleep." Josephine watched from the glass, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had seen combat veterans before Mercy General saw plenty of overflow from the nearby military installations, but this level of tactical resistance while in hemorrhagic shock was inhuman. The body naturally wants to shut down, to surrender to the darkness when trauma becomes too severe. This man was forcing his nervous system to stay awake through sheer, unadulterated willpower. She pushed through the sliding glass doors, the heavy sound of the hospital fading behind her as she entered the immediate perimeter of the trauma bay. "Josie, get security back in here," Nolan yelled over his shoulder, struggling to hold a pressure dressing against the man's chest. He broke the left arm restraint. "We need soft ties, right now." "Security isn't going to help, Nolan," Josephine said quietly, stepping up to the foot of the bed. She didn't look at the monitors, she looked at the patient. You're escalating his adrenaline. You're acting like a threat. I'm trying to save his damn life, Nolan barked. Josephine ignored the doctor and focused entirely on the man bleeding out on the table. His chest heaved. His skin was growing dangerously pale, taking on that waxy, ashen hue that preceded cardiovascular collapse, but those grey eyes locked onto hers instantly. He analysed her, in a fraction of a second, noting her empty hands, her relaxed posture, the way she intentionally stood just outside of his striking distance. "You're a long way from home, soldier," Josephine said, keeping her voice even, melodic, and low. The man said nothing, but his breathing hitched, just for a microsecond. "I know you're hurting," she continued, taking one slow, deliberate step forward. "I know you feel like you're surrounded behind enemy lines, but if you keep bleeding like this, your heart is going to stop, and you won't be able to fight anybody then. If they put me to sleep," the man whispered, his gaze flickering to the syringe still clutched in the panicked nurse's hand across the room. "I don't wake up. They are coming." "Who is coming?" Dr. Bridges demanded, frustrated. "Paranoia. It's the blood loss. He's hypoxic." "Josie, hold his arm down." "Nolan, stop," Josephine ordered, her voice suddenly carrying an authority that made the senior attending physician pause. She looked back at the patient. "Who is coming for you?" The man's lips formed a tight, bloodless line. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter. You touch my veins with that chemical. I kill everyone in this room before my heart stops. Try me." The chilling sincerity in his voice froze the room. Travis backed away slowly. Even Nolan hesitated, his hand trembling over the bloody gauze. Josephine stepped closer, moving to the left side of the bed. As she did, the harsh overhead light caught the inside of the man's left forearm. The skin was smeared with dried, flaking blood, but beneath it, Josephine saw the faint, dark blue ink of a tattoo. Her breath caught in her throat. The world around her seemed to tunnel, the frantic beeping of the heart monitors fading into a dull, distant ringing. It was a rusted anvil, split straight down the middle by a jagged lightning bolt. Beneath the ruined metal, inked in sharp, minimalist lettering, was a Latin phrase: ferrum frigidum, cold iron. Josephine felt the blood drain from her own face. Her mind violently snapped backward in time, plunging 5 years into the past to a rain-swept military cemetery in Arlington. She remembered the folded flag. She remembered the devastating, hollow sound of the rifle volley. And she remembered the small, incredibly heavy wooden box her mother had been handed. Because there hadn't been enough of her brother, Liam, left to fill a casket. Liam had the exact same tattoo. He had gotten it during his 3rd deployment, right after he had been recruited out of Army Rangers into something he was completely forbidden to talk about. Joint Special Operations Command. He had once whispered to her in their kitchen, highly intoxicated on a brief 48-hour leave. "A ghost unit, Josie? We don't exist. We are the blacksmiths. We hammer out the problems the government pretends aren't real." She remembered begging him to explain the tattoo. "Why a broken anvil?" she had asked. Liam had smiled. A sad, exhausted smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Because anvils are meant to take a beating, Josie. But eventually, even the strongest iron breaks under the hammer. When it does, we're the ones left holding the pieces." "Josie," Nolan's sharp voice shattered her memory, yanking her back to the bloody reality of Bay 4. His pressure is 70/40, and dropping. We are losing him. Restrain his arm now. Josephine blinked, staring at the man on the table. This man wasn't just a veteran, he was a ghost. He was one of Liam's brothers, and if he was acting this paranoid, if he was fighting this hard to stay awake, it wasn't hypoxia. It was protocol. "Nolan, give me 2 minutes," Josephine said, her voice eerily calm. "Are you insane?" Nolan yelled, his frustration boiling over. "He doesn't have 2 minutes. He's going into hypovolemic shock. If you try to force that needle into his arm, he is going to rip his own subclavian artery wide open trying to fight you off, and he will bleed to death in 30 seconds. Josephine shot back, glaring at the doctor. You know I'm right. Look at his muscle tension. He is fully prepared to tear himself apart to keep you away. Nolan looked at the patient, then at the snapped leather restraint dangling from the rail. He swallowed hard, realizing the grim truth of her words. 2 minutes, Josie. Then I'm calling in the police. And we are holding him down with 10 men if we have to. Nolan stepped back, raising his bloody hands in surrender. Travis, get the crash cart ready. If he crashes, we shock. The medical team backed away to the perimeter of the room, leaving Josephine alone beside the bed. The man watched her, his grey eyes calculating. His breathing was becoming ragged, his chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate staccatos. The loss of blood was finally taking its toll, but the sheer, primal danger radiating from him hadn't diminished an ounce. You think you can talk me down, nurse? He rasped, coughing weakly. A small fleck of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. I don't think I can talk you into anything, Josephine said softly, reaching out and grabbing a stack of sterile gauze from the nearby surgical tray. She didn't move toward his wound, she just held it. You're bleeding from a deep laceration near the subclavian. You have about 5 minutes before your brain stops getting enough oxygen to maintain consciousness. Once that happens, you won't have a choice. You'll pass out, and they will sedate you. Let them try, he whispered fiercely. You're fighting a losing battle, she said, leaning slightly closer. You're protecting yourself from a threat you think is coming through those doors. But the real threat is the leak in your chest. They tracked me. The man forced the words out, his jaw rigid. The hit. It wasn't sloppy. It was precise. Left me bleeding just enough to drop me at a hospital. They know protocol. They know once I'm registered in a civilian system. Once I'm sedated. I'm a sitting duck. They'll walk right in wearing white coats. It's what they do. Josephine's stomach twisted into a cold knot. What they do. He was suggesting an assassination attempt disguised as medical care. To any other nurse in the building, this would sound like the textbook paranoid delusions of a trauma patient suffering from acute blood loss. But Josephine had read Liam's journals after he died. She knew the kind of dark, subterranean world these men operated in. She knew that the paranoia was often a heavily trained survival instinct. If I don't stop this bleeding, you die right here, Josephine said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. No assassins required. Then I die awake, he replied, his eyes burning into hers. I die on my feet. Not asleep, in a bed. He shifted his weight, preparing to sit up, a suicidal move that would undoubtedly tear his artery open completely. Josephine knew she had no time left. The monitors behind her were screaming, the red numbers dropping to critical levels. She had to bypass his training. She had to reach the core of his conditioning, the one thing that superseded his paranoia. She remembered the nights Liam would wake up screaming in the guest room. She remembered holding him as he shook, murmuring things she wasn't supposed to hear. She remembered the phrases, the call signs, the lifeline that the blacksmiths used when they were completely cut off, operating in the dark, and needed to verify a friendly contact. Josephine took a deep breath. She stepped squarely into the man's personal space, placing her body between him and the rest of the medical staff in the room, so they couldn't see her face or hear her words. She leaned down until her lips were only inches from his ear. She could smell the gunpowder mixed with his sweat. Iron strikes cold, Josephine whispered into the space between them. The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The man's entire body went entirely rigid, as if 1,000 volts of electricity had just been pumped through his spine. The defiant, aggressive glare in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by a look of profound, paralyzing shock. His pupils blew wide open, swallowing the grey of his irises. For 3 agonized seconds, the trauma bay ceased to exist. It was just the two of them locked in a desperate, silent gravity. He stared up at her, his chest completely still, ignoring the screaming pain of his wounds. He was searching her face, scanning every millimeter of her expression for a lie, a trap, a mistake. But Josephine held her ground, keeping her eyes locked firmly onto his, projecting every ounce of calm and sincerity she possessed. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His lips parted, trembling slightly, and a sound came out of him that was half sob, half breath. The anvil holds firm, he breathed the counter-phrase, the words barely audible over the rhythmic screaming of the heart monitor. Josephine felt a massive wave of relief wash over her, followed immediately by a spike of intense fear. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. She had just identified herself as part of a world she had no business being in. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice suddenly frantic, desperate. He reached up with his uninjured hand and gripped her wrist. His grip was weak, trembling from the blood loss, but there was a desperate need in his touch. "How do you know that? Who sent you?" "Nobody sent me," Josephine whispered back, keeping her voice incredibly low so Nolan and Travis wouldn't hear. "My name is Josephine O'Connor. My brother was Staff Sergeant Liam O'Connor. He was one of you." The man's breath hitched. "O'Connor. Irish. He was my spotter. In Kandahar. He died 5 years ago." "I know," Josephine said, her vision blurring with unshed tears. "I'm his sister. And right now, I am the only friend you have in this entire hospital. But I need you to let me help you, because you are dying, and I won't lose another one of you." The man stared at her, the walls of his heavy conditioning visibly crumbling. The sheer exhaustion of his trauma was rushing in to fill the void left by his retreating paranoia. He squeezed his eyes shut, a single tear cutting a track through the grime and blood on his cheek. "They're coming, Josephine," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The men who did this, it's a burn-op. They're cleaning house. Anyone connected to the Jericho file. They put a tracker in my shoulder when they cut me. They're just waiting for the hospital to register my identity." "Then we don't register you," Josephine said, her mind racing, making a dozen dangerous decisions in the span of a single heartbeat. "We get the tracker out. We stop the bleeding. The doctor..." He gestured weakly toward Nolan, who was watching the exchange with growing impatience. "If he puts me to sleep, I can't protect you." "He won't put you to sleep," Josephine promised, her eyes hardening with resolve. "I'll do it. Local anesthetic only. You stay awake." "Josie, your time is up," Dr. Bridges shouted from across the room, taking a step forward. "I am pushing the sedative now." Josephine spun around, raising her hand. "No. Put the syringe down, Nolan. Have you lost your mind?" Nolan yelled, his face turning red. "He is dying. He's consenting to treatment," Josephine yelled back, her voice echoing off the tile walls. She turned back to the man, holding his gaze. "Right? You are consenting." The man looked at Nolan, then at the syringe, and finally back to Josephine. He gave a single, stiff nod. Only her. He rasped loudly enough for the room to hear. "She treats me. Nobody else touches me." Nolan stared at them, completely dumbfounded. "That is not protocol. He has a lacerated subclavian. He needs surgery. If you force him into surgery, he will fight until his heart explodes." Josephine countered rapidly, stepping toward the surgical tray. "He's an extreme trauma case with severe PTSD. I have established a rapport. I need a suture kit, Kelly clamps, and a bottle of lidocaine." "Now, Nolan, I am the attending physician," Nolan protested. "And I am telling you that if you touch him, he will die on your table. And I will testify that you ignored his explicit denial of sedation." Josephine bluffed, playing the only card she had. It was a massive violation of hospital policy, a move that could cost her her license, but she didn't care. Liam's ghost was standing in the room with them, watching her. Nolan hesitated, looking at the monitors. The blood pressure was terrifyingly low, but it had stabilized slightly since Josephine had started talking to him. The patient had stopped thrashing. "Fine," Nolan spat, throwing his bloody gloves into the biohazard bin. "Fine. It's your license, O'Connor, but I am standing right here. If he codes, I take over." Josephine didn't acknowledge him. She grabbed the sterile tray, loaded a syringe with lidocaine, and picked up the heavy steel Kelly clamps. She moved back to the bed, looking down at the broken soldier. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Alaric," he whispered. Alaric Fletcher. Okay, Alaric. This is going to hurt, Josephine said, her hands steady as she prepared the local anesthetic. You said there's a tracker in the wound. Deep, Alaric confirmed, gritting his teeth. Felt them push it in after the blade. I have to dig it out, she warned him. And I have to clamp the artery while you are completely awake. Alaric reached out, his bloody, calloused fingers wrapping around the cold steel railing of the hospital bed. His knuckles turned entirely white. He looked up at her, the ghost of a hardened warrior returning to his eyes. Do it. Josephine took a breath, stabilizing her hands, and plunged the needle into the edge of the jagged wound. Alaric didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. He just stared at the ceiling, breathing through his nose in a slow, rhythmic, tactical pattern. As Josephine worked, her hands moving with frantic precision through the blood and torn muscle, she felt something hard and metallic deep inside the tissue. It wasn't shrapnel. It was perfectly smooth, cylindrical. She gripped it with the clamps and pulled it free. It dropped onto the stainless steel tray with a sickening clink. It was a microtransmitter, covered in blood, but undeniably glowing with a faint, pulsing red LED light. Nolan gasped behind her. What the hell is that? Nolan, Josephine said, her voice dropping to a dead, serious monotone. I need you to take that tray, walk it down to the incinerator in the basement, and drop it in, right now. I can't just... Nolan stammered, staring at the blinking light in horror. They are already tracking it. Alaric ground out, sweat pouring down his face as Josephine clamped the bleeding artery. If it stays in this room, they will burn this hospital to the ground. The overhead fluorescent lights suddenly flickered, plunging the trauma bay into darkness for a split second before buzzing back to life. Josephine looked at Alaric. His eyes were wide, staring past her toward the emergency room lobby doors. Too late, Alaric whispered. They're here. Silence descended on the trauma bay. But it was the wrong kind of silence. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes a catastrophic pressure drop. Outside the sliding glass doors, the normal, frantic hum of the emergency department seemed to mute, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots hitting the polished linoleum floor. Josephine didn't hesitate. Survival instincts, honed by years of managing violent psychiatric holds and gang retaliations in the ER, instantly kicked into overdrive. She snatched the bloody Kelly clamp, holding the microtransmitter from the sterile tray. Nolan, hit the lockdown button under the main desk, Josephine ordered, her voice completely devoid of panic. Then get into the supply closet and do not come out until the police clear the building. Nolan stood frozen, his eyes darting between the blinking red light in Josephine's hand and the shadowy figures suddenly visible through the frosted glass of the waiting room doors. Josie, they have rifles. They're dressed like tactical police. They aren't police, Alaric rasped, gripping the side rail of the gurney as he forced himself into a sitting position. The movement pulled at his clamped subclavian artery, and fresh blood seeped through the tight gauze Josephine had applied. But his face remained a mask of stone. They are a private asset retrieval team, Cobalt Group, billionaire-funded mercenaries doing off-the-books wet work. If they clear that door and see you standing next to me, you are collateral damage. Move, Nolan! Josephine shouted, shoving the doctor toward the secondary exit. The sheer force of her command broke his paralysis, and Nolan stumbled out of the bay, sprinting toward the staff-only corridor. Josephine turned her attention to the tracker. She needed to buy time. She wrapped the transmitter tightly in a thick layer of medical tape, grabbed a nearby plastic specimen tube, and shoved the device inside. She sprinted to the wall-mounted pneumatic tube station, the system used to send blood samples and medications rapidly throughout the massive hospital complex. Punching in the destination code for the rooftop helipad pharmacy depot, she dropped the tube into the vacuum chute. It sucked upward with a loud, aggressive schwomp. There, Josephine breathed, turning back to Alaric. That tracker is moving vertically at 40 miles an hour to the 12th floor. It's going to take them at least 10 minutes to realize it's a decoy. Clear the stairwells and secure the roof. Alaric looked at her, genuine surprise momentarily breaking through his hardened exterior. You think like a soldier, O'Connor. I think like an ER nurse who has to manage 8 critical patients at once while fighting bureaucracy, she replied, grabbing a clean set of green scrubs from a cabinet and tossing them onto his lap. Same thing. Get out of those bloody clothes. We are leaving. I can't walk, Alaric stated bluntly, his grey eyes assessing his own deteriorating physical state. My blood volume is too low. I'll pass out in the hallway, and I'll drag you down with me. Leave me here. Give me a scalpel. I am not giving you a scalpel, and I am not leaving you. Josephine fired back, stepping into his personal space and grabbing his uninjured arm to haul him upward. My brother died alone in the dirt because his extraction team was 5 minutes late. I am your extraction team tonight, and we are not failing. Stand up. Alaric gritted his teeth, the muscles in his jaw popping as he pushed off the gurney. He swayed violently, his face draining of whatever color it. Josephine instantly ducked under his right arm, wrapping her arm tightly around his waist and taking the brunt of his 220-pound frame against her shoulder. Why are you fighting so hard to live if you're just going to give up in a hospital room? She demanded, steering him toward the rear utility exit that led to the laundry corridors. I have a daughter, Alaric gasped, his voice tight with agonizing pain as they shuffled through the doorway. Madison. She's 7. Her mother died of leukemia 3 years ago. I'm all she has. I left her with a handler at a safe house in Roanoke before this mission went sideways. If I don't make it back, Cobalt Group will find her to tie up loose ends. Josephine's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The stakes had just multiplied infinitely. He wasn't just a wounded operative. He was a desperate father trying to protect his only child. Then you keep your feet moving, Josephine commanded, her grip on his waist tightening fiercely. Because nobody gets to orphan a little girl on my watch. My hospital, my rules, they slipped into the dimly lit, subterranean labyrinth of Mercy General. The laundry corridor smelled intensely of industrial bleach and damp cotton. Above them, the muffled sounds of shouting and the terrifying crash of a breached door echoed through the ceiling tiles. Cobalt Group had entered the ER. Stairs were a brutal, unforgiving reality for a man missing 2 pints of blood. Josephine had guided Alaric to the eastern firewell, the oldest and least utilized stairwell in the building, primarily used by maintenance staff. It led directly down to the underground parking garage and the loading docks. 3 flights, Josephine whispered, her own breathing growing heavy as she practically carried Alaric down the concrete steps. My car is parked in the lower tier. Grey sedan. They'll have the exits covered, Alaric managed to say, his head drooping slightly against her shoulder. Standard perimeter containment. 2 men at every vehicle egress point. The loading dock has a secondary ramp for medical waste trucks, Josephine countered, her mind visualizing the blueprints she had memorized during fire safety training. It requires a staff keycard. They won't know it's there unless they have the hospital's architectural schematics. They have everything, Alaric warned, his tactical instincts refusing to die even as his body failed him. They reached the 2nd floor landing. The heavy fire door suddenly rattled violently. Josephine slammed her back against the concrete wall, pulling Alaric into the shadows beneath the stairwell. She clamped her hand over his mouth, though he was already holding his breath. The heavy metal door swung open, screeching loudly on its rusted hinges. A man stepped onto the landing. He wasn't wearing a police uniform. He was dressed in sleek, civilian tactical gear, black cargo pants, a reinforced softshell jacket, and a Kevlar vest. He held a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP pistol in a low-ready grip, an earpiece snaked down his neck. This was one of the Cobalt Group hunters, a professional killer named Silas, known in the private military circuit for his utter lack of hesitation. Silas swept the pistol across the landing, his eyes narrow and calculating. He keyed his shoulder mic. Target is not on the roof. The tracker was a decoy. Checking the eastern stairwell now. Proceed to lock down the garage. Josephine's blood ran cold. He was directly between them and their only exit. Alaric shifted his weight, his hand weakly reaching for his hip where a sidearm should have been, finding only the thin cotton of the hospital scrubs. He looked at Josephine. a silent apology in his eyes. He was preparing to lunge, to use his body as a human shield so she could run back upstairs. Josephine shook her head sharply. She wasn't a damsel in distress, and she certainly wasn't about to let a dying man take a bullet for her in her own workplace. Her eyes darted around the confined space. Tucked into the corner of the landing, strapped to a rusted dolly, was a massive, industrial-sized oxygen cylinder used for transporting patients on ventilators. It weighed nearly 70 pounds and was pressurized to over 2,000 pounds per square inch. Silas took a step down the stairs, his boots crunching softly on the concrete. He was looking at the blood drops Alaric had left on the previous flight. He was following the trail right to them. "Come out, Fletcher," Silas called out softly, a cruel, arrogant smirk playing on his lips. "You're bleeding out. Make it easy on yourself. The girl in Roanoke is probably already sleeping." The mention of Madison triggered something primal in Alaric, but before he could move, Josephine acted. She let go of Alaric, dropping into a deep crouch. In one fluid, desperate motion, she grabbed the heavy steel wrench chained to the oxygen tank cart, slammed it onto the tank's main valve, and violently wrenched it to the left. She didn't just open it. She snapped the valve completely off. The instantaneous release of 2,000 pounds of pressurized oxygen sounded like a jet engine detonating inside a tin can. The sheer, concussive force of the escaping gas blew the heavy steel cylinder backward like a torpedo. Silas spun around at the deafening roar, his arrogant smirk vanishing. He raised his suppressed pistol, but human reflexes were no match for physics. The 70-pound steel missile slammed directly into Silas's chest with the force of a wrecking ball. The impact lifted the assassin completely off his feet. He flew backward, crashing through the heavy fire door he had just opened, his body crumpling instantly into an unnatural broken heap on the second-floor hallway linoleum. His pistol clattered uselessly down the stairs. It was a swift, brutal, and absolute consequence of underestimating his environment. The deafening hiss of the oxygen tank continued to echo violently in the stairwell, creating a massive cloud of freezing white vapor. Josephine stood up, her hands shaking so violently she could barely feel her fingers. She looked at the broken door, then at Alaric. The Black Ops soldier was staring at her, his jaw slightly slack, absolute awe cutting through his pain. He had spent his entire adult life surrounded by apex predators and Tier 1 operators, yet he had just watched an ER nurse neutralize a highly trained mercenary with a piece of medical equipment in under 3 seconds. "Remind me," Alaric coughed, a tight, grim smile touching the corners of his pale lips. "Never to upset the nursing staff." "Move," Josephine ordered, her voice trembling but fierce. She stepped over the freezing oxygen cloud, grabbed Silas's dropped pistol from the stairs, and expertly checked the chamber, a skill Liam had insisted on teaching her years ago. She shoved the heavy weapon into Alaric's uninjured hand. "Can you shoot?" she asked. Alaric gripped the cold steel of the weapon, the familiar weight instantly grounding him. His eyes hardened, the lethal operative fully returning to the surface. "Just point me at the exit, O'Connor." They descended the final flight of stairs, slipping into the cavernous, echoing expanse of the underground parking structure. The air was cool and smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. Josephine's grey sedan was parked 50 yards away, sitting alone under a flickering sodium light. "Keys," Alaric whispered, scanning the perimeter over the sights of the stolen pistol. "Have them ready. If we encounter resistance, you stay low behind the engine block. Do not look up." Josephine fumbled in her scrub pockets, her fingers closing around her key fob. She pressed the unlock button. The chirping sound of the car unlocking echoed far too loudly in the empty garage. Instantly, the screech of tires tore through the silence. A black SUV, completely devoid of license plates, accelerated from the far end of the garage, its high beams blindingly bright as it aimed directly for them. Cobalt Group had found the secondary ramp. "Get down!" Alaric roared, stepping squarely in front of Josephine, raising the pistol and preparing to make his final stand. Josephine dove sideways, her medical instincts entirely overridden by sheer adrenaline. She hit the cold, oil-stained concrete hard, scraping her elbows through her scrubs, and scrambled behind the reinforced engine block of her vehicle. Above her, Alaric did not dive. Despite the catastrophic blood loss, despite the agonizing pinch of the steel Kelly clamp biting into his subclavian artery, the Phantom of Joint Special Operations Command anchored his boots to the floor. He raised the stolen, suppressed Heckler and Koch pistol with a terrifying, icy calm. He didn't aim at the driver. He aimed at the vehicle's mechanics. Twip. 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 3 suppressed shots punched through the heavy silence of the garage. The first hollow-point round shattered the driver's side headlight. The second punched clean through the reinforced front grille, burying itself directly into the radiator. The third struck the front left tire precisely at the valve stem. The SUV violently jerked to the left as the tire instantly deflated. The driver, suddenly fighting a massive loss of traction and forward momentum, overcorrected. The heavy vehicle screeched in a wide, uncontrolled arc, its rear bumper violently sideswiping a concrete load-bearing pillar. The impact sounded like a bomb detonating in a canyon, showering the area in sparks and shattered fiberglass. The SUV ground to a halt 50 feet away, steam hissing furiously from the crippled radiator. "In the car!" Alaric barked, his voice ragged. He swayed dangerously, the recoil of the weapon nearly knocking him off his feet. Josephine didn't hesitate. She scrambled up, ripped open the driver's side door, and practically threw herself behind the steering wheel. Alaric collapsed into the passenger seat, his heavy frame hitting the upholstery with a wet, heavy thud. He kept his pistol trained on the smoking SUV through the windshield. "They have heavy armor," Alaric gritted out, watching 2 tactical operators kick open the doors of the crippled vehicle. They were wielding compact submachine guns. "Drive. Now." Josephine slammed the key into the ignition, twisted it, and threw the transmission into reverse. She stomped on the gas, the sedan's tires squealing in protest as she backed up in a sharp J-turn. Aligning the nose of the car with the medical waste exit ramp at the far end of the structure, gunfire erupted. Sparks danced across the concrete as a hail of bullets chewed into the floor just inches behind her rear bumper. One stray round punched through the trunk, shattering the back windshield in an explosion of tempered safety glass. Josephine screamed, ducking her head instinctively, but she kept her foot pinned to the floorboard. "Keep your head down and steer," Alaric shouted over the rushing wind and the deafening echo of gunfire. They hit the steep incline of the secondary ramp. At the top of the tunnel, a heavy, chain-link security gate blocked their path, secured by a thick steel padlock. "I don't have the keycard for that gate," Josephine yelled, panic finally clawing at her throat. "Don't slow down," Alaric ordered, bracing his uninjured hand against the dashboard. "Hit it at an angle. Target the hinges, not the lock." Josephine gritted her teeth, tightened her grip on the steering wheel, and aimed the right front quarter panel of the sedan directly at the gate's structural weak point. They struck the heavy steel mesh at 40 miles an hour. The horrific sound of crunching metal filled the cabin as the sedan's bumper folded inward, but the sheer kinetic energy tore the rusted hinges straight out of the cinder block wall. The gate flew outward, crashing onto the wet asphalt of the back alley. They burst out into the freezing night air, tearing down the narrow service road and merging violently onto the rain-slicked pavement of the main avenue. Josephine merged into the sparse late-night traffic, her heart threatening to hammer its way out of her ribcage. She checked her rearview mirror frantically. Nobody was behind them. They had broken the perimeter. We got out," Josephine gasped, her hands trembling so violently she could barely keep the car in the lane. "I need to get you to another hospital." "Street Jude's is across town." "No hospitals," Alaric interrupted, his voice growing frighteningly faint. He was slouched against the passenger window, his breathing shallow and rapid. The adrenaline dump was fading, and his body was shutting down. Blood was soaking through the green scrubs, pooling darkly on the fabric of the seat. They monitor all trauma admissions. Statewide network. We go to a clinic. We die. "Alaric, your subclavian is clamped, but you've lost at least 3 pints," Josephine argued, her clinical brain taking over as she evaluated his pale, clammy skin. "You are entering stage 3 hypothalamic shock. If I don't get whole blood into your veins in the next 30 minutes, your organs will fail. You will suffocate from the inside out." "Liam," Alaric whispered, his eyes fluttering shut. He had a guy, a ghost doc, used to patch up off-the-books assets, place in the industrial district, Dr. Arlo Finch, old army surgeon, check the glove box, Liam's old burner phone, GPS coordinates. Josephine's breath caught at the mention of her brother. She leaned over, popped the glove compartment, and rummaged through the loose napkins and registration papers. Her fingers brushed against a heavy, outdated satellite phone. She pulled it out and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, displaying a single saved waypoint located in a defunct warehouse district near the shipyards. "Hold on, Alaric," Josephine said, her voice hardening with sudden resolve. "I've got it, just stay awake. Tell me about Madison. Tell me about your daughter." She knew the psychological trick. Keep the trauma patient talking. Anchor them to the one thing they refuse to leave behind. "She has her mother's eyes," Alaric murmured, fighting to keep his heavy eyelids open. "Loves to draw. Wanted a dog. Promised her I'd get her a golden retriever when this rotation was over." "You're going to get her that dog," Josephine commanded, taking a sharp left turn, pushing the sedan well past the speed limit as they bypassed the glowing neon signs of the inner city and headed toward the dark, rusted skeletons of the old industrial sector. "You're going to walk into that safe house in Roanoke, and you're going to take her home. Need to finish the mission first," Alaric rasped, clutching the bloody scrubs over his chest. "Jericho, they have to pay." The GPS coordinates led them to a decrepit, graffiti-covered building that advertised itself as an overnight commercial pet boarding facility. The windows were blacked out, and the heavy steel roll-up door was shut tight. Josephine killed the headlights and parked the battered sedan in the dark alley behind the building. She practically dragged Alaric out of the car. He was dead weight now, barely conscious, his skin cold to the touch. She hammered her fist desperately against the reinforced steel of the back door. "Dr. Finch!" "Arlo Finch, open the door," she screamed. A heavy deadbolt clacked loudly. The door swung open to reveal a tall, gaunt man in his late 50s, wearing stained coveralls and holding a massive, custom-built Sig Sauer P-226, squarely aimed at Josephine's chest. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and instantly recognized the tactical situation. "Who the hell are you?" Arlo demanded, his gravelly voice dropping an octave. "And how did you get this address?" Liam O'Connor gave it to him. Josephine gasped under Alaric's weight. "I'm Josephine, Liam's sister. This is his spotter, Alaric. He has a clamped subclavian laceration, stage 3 hypovolemia, and he needs O-negative blood 10 minutes ago, or you're going to have a corpse on your doorstep." Arlo's eyes widened at the mention of Liam's name. He lowered the weapon instantly, his combat medic training overriding his paranoia. "Get him inside. Room 2, on the stainless steel table. Move." The interior of the building was a bizarre hybrid of a veterinary clinic and an advanced illicit trauma center. Cages lined the far walls, housing a few confused pit bulls, but the center of the room featured a state-of-the-art surgical suite. Arlo moved with terrifying efficiency. Within 60 seconds, he had Alaric strapped to the table, an oxygen mask over his face, and 2 large-bore IVs shoved into the uninjured veins in his right arm. He pulled thick plastic bags of dark red blood from a specialized medical refrigerator. "I keep a private reserve for the local Irish syndicate," Arlo muttered, hooking the bags to a rapid infuser. "Lucky for him, they pay well to keep the inventory fresh." "What happened?" "Cobalt Group." Alaric breathed through the oxygen mask, his eyes cracking open as the warm blood began to hit his system, pulling him back from the brink. "Hit squad." Arlo froze, a bag of saline suspended in his hand. He looked at Josephine, his face suddenly turning ashen. "Cobalt? Girl, you brought a hellstorm to my door. They don't leave loose ends. If they tracked him here—" "They didn't," Josephine interrupted firmly, washing her hands aggressively at the deep sink in the corner. I sent their tracking device to the roof of Mercy General before we broke perimeter. We're clean for now." Arlo let out a long, shaky breath, picking up a surgical scalpel. "All right, let's fix this artery before he bleeds out internally. Scrub in, Josie. I need a competent surgical assist." For the next 2 hours, the veterinary clinic transformed into a high-stakes operating theatre. Josephine worked seamlessly alongside Arlo, anticipating his need for suction, retractors, and cauterization tools. It was a brutal, delicate dance of repairing torn vascular tissue and cleaning out the shredded muscle. As the fresh blood circulated through Alaric's system, the deadly grey pallor faded from his skin, replaced by the bruised, battered flush of a man stubbornly refusing to die. When Arlo finally tied off the last suture and applied a heavy sterile dressing to Alaric's chest, the tension in the room broke, leaving behind a heavy, exhausted silence. "He's stable," Arlo announced, stripping off his bloody gloves and tossing them into a biohazard bin. "But he can't move for at least 24 hours. He needs time to regenerate." "We don't have 24 hours," Alaric said, his voice stronger now, though still raspy. He reached up and pulled the oxygen mask down to his chin. He looked directly at Josephine, his grey eyes piercing through the harsh fluorescent light. Cobalt Group wasn't hired by a random warlord. They were contracted internally. Josephine walked over to the edge of the surgical table. "By who?" "Director Nathaniel Cross," Alaric stated, the name dropping into the room like a live grenade. "He's the head of our shadow division at the Pentagon. He runs the blacksmiths." Arlo cursed violently, kicking a rolling stool across the floor. "Cross? You're telling me the architect of your entire Black Ops infrastructure burned his own operative?" "It's called the Jericho file," Alaric explained, struggling to sit up. Josephine gently pushed his good shoulder back down, forcing him to remain flat. "Stay still. Talk. For the last 5 years, high-yield tactical assets, Stinger missiles, encrypted communication arrays, experimental drone tech have been quietly disappearing from conflict zones right after our unit secured them," Alaric continued, his jaw tight with anger. "Command always chalked it up to local insurgent scavenging, but I found a digital ledger on a server in Damascus. Cross wasn't losing the weapons. He was selling them to the highest bidder on the black market. He's been using the blacksmiths as his personal, highly lethal logistics company. We do the bleeding, secure the assets, and he brokers the sale." Josephine's mind raced, connecting the terrifying dots. "And, Liam?" Alaric closed his eyes, a deep, profound sorrow washing over his scarred features. "Liam didn't die in a random ambush in Kandahar, Josie. He was the first one to notice the supply discrepancies. He started asking the wrong questions to the wrong command officers. Cross couldn't risk a court-martial. He intentionally leaked our grid coordinates to a local Taliban cell and denied our request for air support when the firefight started. He let Liam die to protect his smuggling ring." The sterile air of the clinic suddenly felt freezing cold. Josephine stumbled backward, her hand gripping the edge of a stainless steel counter to keep from falling. The grief of her brother's death, a wound that had taken 5 long years to scar over, violently ripped open. It wasn't war that killed Liam. It was greed. It was a betrayal from the very man who swore to protect him. "I secured the physical hard drive with a ledger," Alaric said, his voice turning hard and lethal. "I hid it in a dead drop in Roanoke, right before I put Madison in the safe house. I was on my way to deliver the evidence to a contact at the Inspector General's office when Cross realized I had the data. He sent Cobalt to intercept me." "The safe house," Josephine whispered, the horrifying realization dawning on her. "You said you left Madison with a handler, Agent Mason." Alaric nodded, but then he froze, the color draining from his face once again. "Mason reports directly to Cross. He's the one who assigned the safe house." "Oh my God," Arlo breathed, rubbing his temples frantically. "Cross doesn't need to hunt you down, Alaric. He's already got your daughter. He's using her as leverage for the hard drive." Panic, raw and blinding, finally shattered Alaric's composure. He ripped the IV lines out of his arm, ignoring the sudden spray of blood, and swung his legs off the side of the table. I have to go. I have to get to Roanoke. You won't make it to the state line, Arlo shouted, rushing forward to stop him. You'll tear your artery open before you get to the highway. It's my daughter, Arlo! Alaric roared, shoving the older doctor back with terrifying force. If Cross gets his hands on that drive, he will kill her anyway. I have to rip his throat out. Stop, Josephine screamed, stepping directly in front of Alaric. She slammed her hands against his uninjured shoulder, using every ounce of her strength to halt his momentum. He glared down at her, breathing heavily. A cornered, desperate animal, ready to tear through anything in his path. But Josephine didn't flinch. She stared right back, her eyes burning with a sudden, icy fire. You are a soldier, Alaric. Act like one, she commanded, her voice vibrating with absolute authority. If you storm that safe house half dead and bleeding, they will put a bullet in your head, and Madison dies. You need a tactical advantage. You need someone they aren't expecting. Alaric stopped fighting her, his chest heaving. What are you saying? Cross thinks you're either dead in a hospital alley or bleeding out in a ditch, Josephine said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. He doesn't know you have the drive. He doesn't know you survived. And most importantly, he doesn't know about me. No, Alaric shook his head instantly. Absolutely not. You are a civilian nurse. You patched me up. Your part in this is over. I'm not dragging Liam's sister into a war zone. Liam's sister is already in the war zone. Josephine fired back, pointing a bloody finger at his chest. That man murdered my brother. He stole my family. And now he's trying to steal yours. I know how to handle pressure. I know how to keep a dying man alive. And thanks to Liam, I know how to shoot. She turned to the stainless steel counter, picked up the suppressed Heckler and Cock pistol, and expertly checked the magazine. She slapped it back into the grip with a satisfying click and turned back to the two stunned men. Arlo, get me a medical trauma kit, tactical grade. Pack it with enough adrenaline and clotting factors to keep a corpse walking, Josephine ordered. Her transformation from healer to hunter complete. She looked back at Alaric, her gaze unwavering. We drive to Roanoke. You give me the location of the dead drop. I retrieve the drive. I walk into that safe house pretending to be an extraction medic sent by Cross. I get Madison out. You provide sniper overwatch. Alaric stared at her, seeing the ghostly reflection of his fallen spotter in the fierce set of her jaw. He saw the anvil. He saw the cold iron. Cross has heavily armed professionals, Josie, Alaric warned, his voice thick with emotion. If they catch you, they won't make it quick. Then we better make sure they don't catch me, Josephine replied, slipping the heavy pistol into the waistband of her scrubs. Let's go get your daughter. The transition from the sterile, brightly lit halls of Mercy General to the blood-soaked shadows of a covert war was absolute. Josephine O'Connor had started her shift, fighting the chaotic nature of human mortality. She ended it marching deliberately into the crosshairs of a heavily armed mercenary syndicate. She had breached the invisible wall separating the civilian world from the subterranean violence her brother died in. Alaric Fletcher, a ghost haunted by the ghosts of his past, had found an unexpected lifeline in the very family he had failed to protect in Kandahar. Bound together by shared grief and an unbreakable promise to an innocent child, they were no longer just a desperate patient and a reckless nurse. They were a unified, lethal strike force. The anvil had indeed been struck, shattering the quiet life Josephine had known. But from the ruined iron emerged a cold, unyielding weapon, forged in blood and aimed directly at the heart of the men who thought they were untouchable.